Happy New Year, everyone. My name is James Lynch. Thanks so much for checking out Octagon Outlook here every Monday on the Live Movement channel. Thanks so much for watching. I hope everyone had a great holiday season. We're excited to get back into it. Today, we're going to be talking all things 2021, giving our MMA predictions. And who better than to have my partner in crime, my longtime podcast co-host, Adam Martin, here on the program, a returning guest. Adam, how's it going, man?
I'm doing great, James. I was so happy when you sent me that DM this weekend to join the show with you guys. So love doing it, man. We had a great time. I think it was back in October, and I can't wait to do it again. We're in 2021 now, though, so it's a much different world.
It certainly is. And quick congratulations to you. You got engaged over the holidays. A lot of big news outside the cage for you, Adam. I'm excited to see what 2020 brings you, not only professionally, but personally. It's going to be a big year for you, man.
That's really nice of you, James. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, engaged. I'm also going to be a father in the summer, hopefully. So everything's going really well, man. Listen, overall, it was a bad year for everyone. That includes me, too. But we have a lot to look forward to in 2021. I'm thankful that my health is still intact. Thankfully, I haven't got COVID. I've been safe. I've been healthy. So is my family. Thank God. I look forward to 2021. That's going to be fantastic. And this thing goes to you and your family, James. You have a young family, obviously, and I hope all you guys are well. But I can't wait to talk about some fights.
Awesome. Well, we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to give out our 2021 predictions. So Adam and I, we went through, a couple questions yesterday, kind of went through what our predictions are. So I actually don't know what Adam's going to say here, which is great. Adam knows my answers, but it should be really interesting. Before we get into that, though, if you guys want to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Like I said, all my best interviews are on this channel every single week. And this podcast is on our channel every single week, along with the betting show that Dan Levi and Dan Tom do every Thursday. So keep your eyes out for that as well. But we're going to start first with Conor McGregor, Adam. Of course, this fight is coming up here very soon. He's going to be rematching Dustin Poirier. We think, for now anyways, it's not going to be for a title, but we'll see if that changes. But we're going to start here first with our first prediction. How many times will Conor McGregor fight this year, Adam? I want to get your prediction on that. We'll start there first.
Yeah, and like you said, James, I did have your answers right away. You don't know what I'm going to pick. And for the most part, James, I tried to pick a different answer than you just to make it more interesting, obviously. But in this case, I actually agree with your answer. You said 2 times. I think that's bang on. Right now, we have him booked for January 23rd. Fingers crossed, no COVID issues, no injuries. That fight with Dustin Poirier is going to happen January 23rd. Right now, James, I mean, really, that fight could be a number contender fight. It could end up being for a vacant belt or an interim belt, depending on how that meeting between Khabib and Dana goes in January. So we have no idea what's going to happen there, but I would expect that fight to go on. And then he'll probably fight once more later towards the year, like in October kind of thing. Probably for the lightweight title, if I had to guess, depending on, again, what Khabib says, right, to Dana later this month. But I think you're bang on, James. I think twice it seems like a good number for Conor this year.
Yeah, and I don't think it'll be any more. I think, if he only fights once, that wouldn't surprise me either. I think we might see Conor McGregor take a boxing fight this year, and that's why I picked only the 2 times in the cage, because of the fact that I think he's looking at, guys like Jake Paul and, Logan Paul taking, these YouTubers taking fights and seeing some of the money that's being thrown around, beating a welterweight in Cowboy Cerrone. So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of look at the bookings, but I think we'd be lucky to see Conor fight twice. He only fought once last year. The year before, I think he fought just 1 time. Conor doesn't fight that often, and I think part of that is him, when he went over to fight Floyd Mayweather, he saw the type of money he was making, and I think he knows that it's got to be financially lucrative for him. And in a time,
I don't think Conor minded. He stayed safe. He didn't have to travel to fight. He didn't have to train to fight. For him, he's making money outside the cage, James. He has business ventures now. He has Proper 12. He has other things going on. So I'm 100% with you, James. He's not the same guy he was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, because he doesn't need the money from fighting as much as he used to. So I think when you said a boxing match, you're bang on, James. I'll be honest, James, I don't know if it happens this year. I still think we're going to see him fight Manny Pacquiao, no boxing. I think that fight will happen one day. What do you think?
I agree. And I think that you're seeing, he could fight one of these YouTube guys. You never know. I don't know if they'll sanction it. That would be like almost like murder if Conor was to fight like, Jake Paul just beating a NBA player. I don't think that would turn out too well. But yeah, I think in general, we'll probably see Conor maybe fight twice at best. And if he fights more than that, that will exceed my expectations. But with Conor, the bar set very low. And again, I don't blame him because, you want him to make more money. But as a fan, it would be nice to see him fight a little bit more frequently. Okay, so Adam and I both agree on that first point. Second prediction, who will be the first UFC champion to lose their title? Now, I should mention right now, at the time of recording this, I'm just looking at Tapology here and trying to see which fights are booked. So, the next title fight we have isn't actually until, I think, is 257. That's Chandler and Hooker. So there's no title fight on there yet. That could be a title fight, though. We'll see. But even then, it would be a vacant title, so no one would lose it. The February 6th card is not a title fight. 256 or 258, I should say, February 13th. That's Usman and Burns. So that's a possibility of a champion losing their title. And then you have to go all the way to 259 for the next title fight, which is Jan Blachowicz and Israel Adesanya. You get what I'm getting at, though, Adam? Who do you think right now with the fights we have booked, which isn't a lot, who do you think loses their title first?
No, I think you're making a good point bringing that up, James. Like, there's a lot of champions right now that are just kind of waiting for their fights. I think we'll see some cards coming up, these pay-per-views with like 3 title fights on them, James, because they have so many champs that need to get back in the cage. I'm going to cheat a little bit with my answer, James. I'm actually going to say it's going to be Khabib, and it's not because he lost the cage, his belt inside the cage. I think he's going to vacate his title. I think he's going to have a talk with Dana White. Yeah, I think so. The more I thought about it, I think he'll vacate his belt because he's a man of his word, James. He's a man of honor. He said that Conor and Dustin don't deserve to fight him for the belt. He's already beat them twice. What does he have to gain besides, obviously, the financial aspect of it? I think he'll vacate his belt when he has his meeting, and I think he's going to really push for that fight with GSP. I think that's the only fight he'll come back for, James. Will that fight happen before the end of the year? I'm not 100% sure it will because I'm not convinced GSP is going to come back. By the way, that announcement last week when he said he had a big announcement was just a Budweiser non-alcoholic beer. I knew it wasn't going to be the fight. Like, I didn't think they'd make the announcement like that, but I do think we might see that fight happen at some point, James, maybe later this year, maybe next year. But regardless, I don't think his division is going to be held up because I think Khabib's going to vacate his belt.
Well, Adam was very creative in this answer because I didn't even consider that as an option with Khabib. You're right, though. Technically, if we're talking about first champion who lose their title, that's absolutely correct right now. Although I guess, is he still technically the champ? I don't know. I don't even know what's going on right now.
Dana White said he's still the champ somehow. I don't know how.
Okay, well, no, we'll take it. That's a very clever answer. But anyways, let's assume that, you know, all the title fights that we have are only at our disposal and not, you know, sort of something like the Khabib situation. So you've got Usman and Burns. Personally, I think Usman wins that fight. So he's out of the equation. I'm going Israel Adesanya beating Jan Blachowicz. I think that's the first title to change hands. And look, I am the king of underestimating Jan Blachowicz. I think I picked Corey Anderson against him. I think I picked Dominic Reyes against him. I'm obviously not very good at picking Jan Blachowic's fights, so don't take what I say into stock too much. But I just think that Adesanya knows what he's doing. He's moving up at a good time. He's fighting a champion in Jan Blachowicz, who's, you know, just won the title, but he's, you know, he's fairly old. I mean, Adesanya's a lot younger than he is. I'm just looking here at the age, so I don't screw it up here. But Jan Blachowicz,
he's 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, he's 37 years old right now, Jan Blachowicz. And, you know, there's some losses in there. You know, the knockout loss to Thiago Santos. I mean, this is not a guy who's been, you know, avoiding damage his whole career. He's taken a bit of damage here. And I think with the guy in Adesanya who's moving up, doesn't have to cut weight, he'll be pretty fast. He's already got really good striking. We've seen that in the kickboxing world and in his MMA career. I think Adesanya can pull this off. So for my pick on this one, I'm going to go Jan Blachowicz loses his title in terms of the first champion to lose their belt this year. If we're going by just the fights that are booked right now, I don't think, and the other title fight I should mention that's also on this card, Nunes and Anderson. I don't think Anderson wins that fight. You know, nothing against her, but I think Nunes is the GOAT for a reason when it comes to the women's fighters. So I think Blachowicz is my pick. Do you know, your early pick on that fight, do you see Adesanya coming out, or are you going with Jan Blachowicz?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good thing to talk about here, James. Just quickly looking at the odds for that fight. Where is it? Mark 259, right? It's basically about minus 270 Izzy, plus 210 for Jan across the board. I'll be honest, James. Like, yeah, of course I'd lean Adesanya, like all of this, dude. Like, I've picked him in every fight in the UFC. I think he's phenomenal. Don't get me wrong. He's an amazing fighter. But I'm like James, man. I keep getting Jan's fights wrong. I pick against him every fight, James. He keeps winning as like a plus 200 underdog every fight. The only one I actually got right was when he knocked out Luke Rockhold. I called that one. The other ones I didn't call. So he's a guy that's kind of tricky to pick, man. So yes, I do lean Izzy, James. But at those odds, like, is this another spot where Jan's going to come through as a big dog again?
Yeah. And I, you know, just looking at the other fights, like, I think Adesanya has a better chance, I think, to beat Jan Blachowicz than, say, Burns beating Usman, because, I mean, they've trained together. I mean, we know Usman's strengths. He's got a good chin. I don't think he'll get knocked out. I think his sub defense, he's rolled around with Gilbert enough to know to avoid the sub. Nunes Anderson, I don't see an upset there. I mean, you know, they haven't booked it yet, but Valentina and Andrade, I think I'd still favor Valentina there. And then, you know, let's say they do Jan and Sterling. Maybe there's an upset there, but we don't even have that fight booked yet. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see some of the other title fights. But for what we have right now, I think Jan Blachowicz will be the first to lose their title. But again, this is a guy who's proved me wrong time and time again. So there you go. Speaking of titles, our third question for this year, TJ Dillashaw is returning. You know, the former bantamweight champion. We'll see how he performs after having a pretty lengthy layoff due to a steroid suspension. And the simple question is this, Adam: will TJ Dillashaw fight for a UFC title in 2021? Your answer.
I think it's a great question, James. Like, it seems like everyone's calling him out, right? Aldo did. Your boy Rob Font called him out too. So, like, everyone's calling him out, all these top 10 guys. The reason is he's a former champ. He's a big name. And I think that a lot of people want to prove that we could beat a guy that used to, you know, use PEDs to win his fights. I'm not convinced TJ Dillashaw is going to be the same guy, James, honestly. Like, he's a guy that's admitted he cheated, was suspended for 2 years. That's a long layoff. he's also not young. I think he's like 34, 35 now, James. Like
Yeah.
he's getting a little bit up there in age. Obviously, he's not super old, but for that division, he's probably one of the older guys now. So to answer your question, my answer is going to be no, because I do think TJ can have some success. I just think this division's stacked. I really think 135 might be the new best division in the UFC. Like I've always thought 155, James, or 170 were the best. For a time, 205 was the best as well. But right now, 135 is stacked. So like you mentioned a few minutes ago, we have Sterling and Jan. They'll be fighting for the belt probably in like the first quarter of the year. And then you have a bunch of other guys in that division, like Corey Sandhagen. He's fighting Frankie Edgar, James. That could be a number one contender fight. You have a bunch of other guys in that division that are going to be gunning for that belt. So to me, it's like it's just a stacked division. So I'm going to say no, because I think there's too many guys for him to get through.
Fair point. However, I was thinking outside the box on this question. I didn't put this in my answer. Who's to say he fights at bantamweight? What if TJ Dillashaw decides one more time he wants to go down to flyweight in a division that, yes, they have the rematch coming up, but that's something where he could say, hey, I want to go back down there and win that title. That's a possibility, I think. I know he's been kind of against going to flyweight, but let's say he returns, he fights someone, he loses. Who's to say he doesn't go down to maybe wins a fight there and then fights for a title there? It's, again, wishful thinking here, but I just think the reason I think Dillashaw will fight for a title, by the way, the question is, will Dillashaw fight for a title, not will he win a title? I don't think Dillashaw will ever win a title.
Oh, good point. Good point.
Yeah. So I wanted to point that out just for some clarification, but I think he will fight for a title, because I think a lot of these fighters look at sort of the clout of, you're fighting someone with a name. And I think if you look at Dillashaw, both at flyweight and at bantamweight, he's one of the bigger names in that division. And that could be something where some of these fighters say, hey, look, I'd rather fight him than some other fighter that's maybe not as well known. And we already saw this with Cody Garbrandt getting the title shot, before against Figueiredo, where it didn't matter that he lost 3 of 4. They were willing to give him a title shot with 0 wins at flyweight. The same thing could happen here with Dillashaw if he wanted to go down and fight at 125. Again, I have no inside information on this. I'm just saying the opportunity with Dillashaw's name and the fact that there is a lot of interest in Dillashaw. He hasn't done a ton of media. He's still a pretty big name, and he had a pretty dominant run at bantamweight before, obviously getting busted for steroids. And I think there's intrigue in seeing him compete again. So that's why I think just the possibility of what his name brings to the table. I think that's why we could see him fight for a title again. It might be 2022 that happens, maybe not 2021, but I'll put my chips in on this one and say that I think Dillashaw fights for a title. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good possibility. Dude, as soon as you said that, I thought outside the box on the last question. You did on this one, James, because I think that's a great answer. His last fight was at 125, right, with Cejudo, where he got KO'd in like 30 seconds. That surprised me, that finish. Also, it was kind of a weird stoppage, right? Kind of a quick one. Look at Cody. Cody knocks out Rafael Santos after losing 3 straight fights, James, and they gave him an immediate title shot at 125. He lost the title shot because he got COVID and he got injured too. So he's going to be out for a minute. But who's to say that, just say they do the same thing for TJ. Maybe he comes back, he picks up a knockout win. Just say he fights Aldo, or just say he fights Rob Font, picks up a knockout win over those guys. Maybe Dana White's like, you know what, let's go down to 125 again and take another shot at it there. So I think you made a good point bringing up 125, James. I didn't even consider it, honestly.
All right, our next question prediction for this year, who will end up coaching the Ultimate Fighter? Now, I should mention the answer I gave you is actually going to be a different answer I'm going to have here today, because I found out some information today that apparently they're not filming this till the summer. So that kind of delays things. Initially, my answer was Colby and Masvidal. It's a slam dunk, two former teammates, 2 guys who can talk really good trash, 2 big names, and a very interesting fight that I think makes a lot of sense for a variety of reasons. However, if they're not doing it till the summer, I can't see Colby waiting that long. Same thing with Masvidal. He hasn't fought since the title fight against Usman. So that probably takes them out of the equation here, because if they're planning to film in the summer, you'd want them to fight sooner than that, I would think. Now, maybe it does take that long, but if you're Colby, you barely fought over the last couple of years because of money issues and trying to find the right fight. I don't know if he wants to go through that again. So I'm going to change my answer here, Adam. I'm actually going to go with someone else. I don't know if they'll ever end up fighting, but I think the UFC could potentially push Israel Adesanya and John Jones as coaches. That would be interesting if you could put them on there. So that's my wild card pick. Do I think it happens? Maybe not, but I had to come up with a name on the spot because I got this new information. So I'm going to go with Jones and Adesanya on this one instead as potential coaches, just because I'm trying to think of who are 2 personalities that they can use that could, delay time a little bit. If Adesanya wins the title or whatever, or he doesn't, let's say middleweight's still figuring things out. Let's say he loses to Blachowicz, then he could do it there. Jones is, he's fighting at heavyweight. It's not really going to determine anything in terms of the title picture. So I could see that happening as far as 2 names that I think would be good coaches. What do you think of that? And what is your choice for who's going to coach the Ultimate Fighter?
I've been covering the Ultimate Fighter and Dana White's kind of announcements here and there for like the last year or so. And he kept saying, we're going to be filming at the end of November. They kept saying that, James. And then all of a sudden now I heard it was the spring, and now you're saying the summer. So this thing's getting delayed, because I had heard November, then I heard March. Now we're hearing the summer. So whenever that's going to be. That's not good. I'll be honest, James, The Ultimate Fighter is something I used to love. It got stale, but I am looking forward to return. I really am, because I think on ESPN they can do something with it. And I think that they can get some good personalities, hopefully, in that house. It could be a fun show to watch. I'm still going to pick Colby and Jorge, James. I agree with you. If it's going to, if we won't see those guys till December to fight, that would really suck. I don't want to wait that long to see that fight. But I'd still want to see that fight. And I just think with those guys, they have such great trash talking games. I'd really like to see them entertain the fans on Ultimate Fighter. So, yes, based on this new information, I mean, I don't know if I want to say it now because I don't want to see this fight at the end of the year, James. And also, not only that, but how many tough coaches matches did we see over the years that it got canceled because of injuries?
Oh, tons. Yeah, too many.
Right? So it's. I always get afraid when they book them as tough coaches, but I just want to see these guys because I think it would be really entertaining.
Someone also mentioned in my live chat this morning is Nate Diaz as a possible tough coach because the guy barely fights and he's a big name, but I just can't see either Diaz brother ever being on the Ultimate Fighter with the commitments they have to do, being coaching. They seem like they beat to their own drum, and I don't think the UFC wants that headache. So I would eliminate them as well. But I mean, I'm just trying to think of other options. Like if Cejudo comes back, maybe him and Volkanovski, I don't know, but I just don't know. Like you have to have a coach that has a good personality. They tried with Junior Dos Santos as a coach, or they've tried with, certain coaches like Stipe, where it just didn't translate very well. And I think you need someone that's got some personality, and there's very few fighters that fit that mold. So the options are a little bit limited, but like I said, Jones and Adesanya would be great. But Colby and Masvidal would be the number one pick if they could make it work. So
let me just bring something up quickly. My guess is, and I don't have any inside information, but I guess they're delaying it because of the vaccine. They must think that they can get the vaccine to the fighters in the house and the coaches, right? So I'm guessing that's the reason, James, because otherwise, like, why is it being delayed, right?
I agree. Let's move on to our next post. I think there's going to be a lot of changes this year in terms of changing of the guard with fighters. And that brings us to question number 5, or the prediction number 5 on here. 3 notable fighters that you think will retire this year, Adam. I'll give my picks after, but let's hear your picks.
Sure. I loved your picks, James. I went with 3 different guys, though.
Perfect.
The first guy, I'll start with the flyweight division, Mr. Joseph Benavidez. I think we've seen the last of him in the UFC, James, especially after those 2 fights with Davison. The second fight, especially, James, was like, when have we ever seen a guy get beaten like that at 125? Like the way he got knocked down and submitted. So I think that'll be it for Joe B. Maybe he'll fight one more time, maybe one more, but I think that's it, James. And to be honest with you, I think he's had a great career, but at this point, he's not going to win the title. So really, what's the point of sticking around? The other guy I have on my list, I have 2 more guys. Donald Cerrone. I think this might be it for Cowboy. And I know he doesn't want to hang him up, James, but we've heard rumblings. Dana White wants to have that talk with him. He says he's going to move down to 155, one last title run at lightweight. I don't see that going well for him, James, at this point in his career. His durability is a massive question mark. Remember when he fought at lightweight last time, when he fought RDA? He just took it to the body and just put him out. So I think the same thing's going to happen. He goes in there and fights. Just say he fights the next guy on my list, Paul Felder, because I think Paul Felder could retire too. I think Paul Felder hurt him to the body and probably finish him, right? So I think Paul can actually still win fights in the UFC, James. I still think he's a top 10 guy. But I think he's such a good commentator. I think he's going to focus on that full time. I think we'll see him fight one more time and probably retire after that. So Donald Cerrone, Joseph Benavidez, and Paul Felder were my 3 picks.
Awesome. The reason I don't think Cerrone was someone I considered, but I just see him because he's not getting like absolutely brutalized in his fights, at least not lately. Like the Price fight, it was a no contest. And, before that, the Pettis fight where I think people felt like he won, I could see him hanging around one more year just because of that because Dana's like, I won't give anyone the talk unless it's like, Junior Dos Santos or someone like that, where they, are getting knocked out brutally. And actually he's someone I should probably put as like an honorable mention. I didn't have JDS on this list, but I think it's the end of the road for JDS, especially at heavyweight. He can't go to light heavyweight. He can't, it's not going to end well for him. So here are my 3. I'm going with Stipe Miocic because I think either win or lose against Ngannou. I think he's got a family now. He's got the firefighting thing. I don't think there's any reason for him to continue at this point. And unless, maybe Jones comes into the fray and maybe decides it there, but I could see Stipe, potentially beating Ngannou and then calling it a career there. So Stipe's on the list because I think at some point he's got to hang him up. And, the fact that they haven't announced a Ngannou fight yet makes me think that maybe he's just waiting for the right situation. And I could see, I could see him maybe being like, is this even worth it? So Stipe's on my list. The other one I'm going to go with is Robbie Lawler. Again, a guy who's not getting completely brutalized fight to fight, but he's also got to win. Adam, he doesn't want to fight in ages. I think at some point they're going to have to cut ties with him. I don't think he comes at a cheap price tag either. He could be someone that's cut, and I don't know if Robbie would want to continue fighting. Maybe he does, but I just don't think he has anything left in the tank, so to speak. So Lawler's my other pick. And then here's kind of a wild card one is I'm going to Amanda Nunes. If she beats Megan Anderson, which I think she will in the featherweight title fight coming up here in March, what's there for her to prove? I mean, I want to see the trilogy fight with her and Valentina, but Nunes doesn't need to take that fight. She technically has 2 wins over her. Who else are you going to fight at bantamweight? Who's really, a rising contender right now that would give her problems? I can't really think of anyone. And featherweight's just been a joke of a division since they started it, a couple of years ago. So I could see Nunes saying, you know what, I'm the GOAT. There's no more challenges for me right now. I'm good. I'll go, be a parent now and go do that. And I could see her hanging them up as well too. So what do you think of those picks, Adam?
Yep. I think they're good. I think it's good to go a little off the wall because it happens all the time. Like, look at this year. I'll tell you right now, if you had asked me a year ago today, James, a year ago, if Cejudo and Khabib would have retired, I would have said just crazy. And they both retired. So, I mean, literally in this sport, these retirements happen all the time. And I got to give James, again, credit because I remember back when GSP fought Johnny Hendricks, and James was the first guy who said, GSP is going to retire, mark my words, and he did. And I didn't believe you, James, but he did. And he came back 4 years later, which is the other thing about MMA. Retirements don't last in sport. They barely last. Yeah. But I think you had some good picks, James.
Kind of on that same note, because I talked about Amanda Nunes there, our sixth question here for our predictions this year. Will there be a UFC women's featherweight division by the end of 2021? I say no, because I think Amanda Nunes beats Anderson. And I think that's it. I talked about this with Jim West, who's the coach of Aspen Ladd, who, kind of disagreed with me there, saying, you could see a lot of women moving up from 135 to 145. They don't have to cut the extra weight. He's pointing out that a lot of women do cut a lot of weight to 135. So if Nunes is out of there, hey, that's a chance to get a title. So he sort of disagreed with me there. But I don't think the UFC is that invested in the division. And I mean, I can name on my hand how many fighters there are in that division. To me, if they cared more about it, they would have signed more fighters. They would have told more women to move up a weight class. We just haven't seen that. So I think if Nunes is done, the division's done. And, I don't want to see anyone lose their jobs. I would feel for, Megan Anderson or Felicia Spencer, or 2 fighters, for example, that will probably never go down to bantamweight just because they're so big for the division. But I'd also see the UFC saying, like, look, we tried this. We gave it a C+ effort, and it's not really turning into anything. So I could see them getting rid of that and potentially bringing in an atomweight division, because I know there's a lot of fighters they could sign there. So I'm saying there will not be a featherweight division at the end of the year. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, it's by far the shallowest, weakest, worst division in the UFC, no doubt about it. No disrespect to the fighters who are in it, but there's only like 4 or 5 of them, James. Like, it's not really a division. It's basically like an extra belt for the UFC to promote pay-per-views with. That's what I look at it as. They have an extra belt to play around with to throw a 3rd title fight or a 2nd title fight. I'm kind of with you, though, because I think once Amanda beats Megan, which is going to happen, she's like a minus 1,100 favorite now. It's like the odds are crazy. Once that happens, James, like, really, what's the point of keeping this division around? Again, there's that belt out there, but I think you're right. I think Amanda could potentially hang it up just because she has her family now, right? So I think we'll get rid of it. Also, I saw a post the other day, Dana White talking about 105 atomweight division, saying that he's thinking about it. So I think I would actually probably rather see that division in the UFC than 145, because there's just frankly more fighters, James. And also you have like someone like Michelle Watterson, who's a marketable star, to move down to her natural weight class at 105, where she was a champion Invictus. So actually, that's another prediction. I'll just say it right now. They'll get rid of 145 and replace it with 105. There you go.
There you go. We agree on that. I'm with you there. Switching over to Bellator. We haven't talked any Bellator yet. We're not an exclusive UFC show. I want to point that out here. But we had 2 big signings by Bellator late last year with Yoel Romero and Anthony Rumble Johnson jumping from the UFC to Bellator. And I see a lot of people on my timeline, Adam, saying Yoel Romero is going to be the champ, and same thing with Rumble Johnson. And we should point out that Yoel Romero is going to be fighting at he's fighting at light heavyweight, I believe, instead of fighting at middleweight. So that's interesting, because I think that's a deeper division for them. And Rumble Johnson as well. He's not going to heavyweight. He's going to stay light heavyweight. But with all that said, Adam, I don't think you'll see Yoel Romero or Anthony Rumble Johnson win a title in Bellator. And what it comes down to for me is this. Number one, Rumble's had a huge layoff. And while he is dangerous and he can knock anyone out, I do wonder if he's going to lose a bit of that power that he had a couple of years ago. Because the last time he fought, I was at his last fight, was in Buffalo when he fought Cormier at UFC 210 in Buffalo. I mean, that was ages ago. So I don't know if we're going to see the same Rumble Johnson in that regard. If we do, then it could be interesting. But I mean, Vadim Nemkov is a very good fighter. Ryan Bader is a very good fighter. These are not guys that are easily put out. Now, I know actually Johnson knocked out Bader, but still, I think Bader's gotten better since he left the UFC. Now, you've got Yoel Romero, but here's the thing, Adam. Yoel's got to slow down at some point. I mean, I know his last fight, he went, the distance with Izzy in one of the worst fights we saw last year. But in general, I don't think this guy is going to be as advertised like we've seen over the last couple of fights. I don't see him going out there and finishing a lot of these guys. I think that Yoel's got to slow down at some point at his age. So for that reason, Romero age and Rumble inactivity, I don't see either of them winning a title. And I think people will be surprised about, some of the talent in Bellator that does rise to the occasion and beats both these guys at some point. So I'm saying no on either of them winning a Bellator title. What do you think?
Yeah, this one's interesting. Great question. Bellator's 205 pound division is pretty good, actually, James. Like, And yes, most of the fighters in it are former UFC fighters, but whatever. I mean, still a good division. And they have a champion that they've kind of developed in Nemkov, who's turned out to be a fantastic fighter. That guy's going to be tough to beat, James. I mean, he looked fantastic against Ryan Bader, knocking him out with that head kick. So that's a huge win. And, looking back at Anthony Johnson knocking out Bader a few years ago, we'll see if they fight again and how a rematch would go. I think the fight could go differently this time just because the 4-year layoff. And I remember when he got signed, James, Coker was like, oh, he's had like a 2-year layoff. It's been 4 years, actually. 4 years, James. So it's a long time ago, man. And he's also a little bit up there in age, but it's Rumble Johnson. He's still got that power, man. I'll be honest, of the two guys, I give Rumble a better chance of winning the belt. He's still in his 30s. Romero's almost 44. He's turning 44 in April. He's lost 3 straight fights. Don't get me wrong, he's fought elite competition. He's looked pretty good in those fights, especially against Whitaker, James. And the Costa fight was somewhat competitive. Actually, the Adesanya fight was competitive. If you look at the scorecards, it was, but a bad fight to watch as a fan. I just think, at 205, I don't know, James. I don't think he'll be the same guy at 205. I know he did fight there at Strikeforce years ago, so he has some experience there. But at this age, I think he's going to be a little too short for that division. Guy like Rumble is massive, James. He's huge. He's a huge dude. Nemkov's a huge dude. Bader. These guys are heavyweights who cut down, whereas he's a light heavyweight cutting down the middleweight. So I think of the two guys, Rumble's got a really good chance. I'm curious to see how they match them up. Do they put them head to head, or do they do the classic Bellator matchmaking, James, where they give them kind of scrubs in their first couple of fights to build them up? What do you think?
That was going to be the next question. Do you think they match them up? I think they do. And I think that's
I'd like
smart
to see
of them
that.
to do it because these aren't two prospects you're putting together. They're veterans. Give the fans the best fight possible. Don't do a Corey Anderson and Melvin Manhoff just to keep Corey active or whatever. You know what I mean? I don't want to see these guys separated. These are the two biggest names that you have in your light heavyweight division right now. Put them together. Let's see what they're made of. And there's a little bit of backstory outside the cage in that Romero's a first round guy. Ali Abdelaziz manages, Anthony Rumble Johnson. So there's some of that history there as well as far as the rival management group. So I'd be all for that fight right off the bat. And I think Bellator, if they're smart, they've been kind of changing their matchmaking a bit, some of their signings as well. You're seeing them put on sort of the best fights as opposed to, giving a Frank Mir, another aging vet. I think they should put these two together and see what happens. So
I like that.
And if that happens, that I think that's even stronger of a case for us to say that neither will win a title, because if one of them wins, the other one's out of the equation. So that's why I'm sticking with no on both. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully Bellator makes that happen for 2021. All right. The 8th question we have here on our predictions is the big one. Khabib Nurmagomedov, of course, has his meeting with Dana White. Will he return? Adam, I'm saying no. Khabib Nurmagomedov strikes me as the type of guy that is not doing this for money. He's not doing this for even legacy, I don't think, at this point, because he's done everything he had to do at lightweight. He's not moving up to 170 because, his buddy is Kamaru Usman, and I just don't see him needing to have that challenge up there with some of the names at 170. I think he's good. I think he talked about how, fighting takes a lot out of him. And I think when he says he's going to retire, I think he's going to stick with it. And I think unless they can get GSP back in there, which I don't see why GSP would come back and do that. Look, dude, you got lucky when you fought Michael Bisping and won the title. I don't think it's going to, you don't want to, tempt the MMA gods here and try and, get another win here in GSP's case. So, and just the money involved, I don't think Khabib's going to return. I think that's the only fight that interests him is the GSP fight. And even though GSP says he wants to come back, why would you come back? You've won 2 titles. It's not going to get any better than it was. This is like Michael Jordan coming back and playing for the Wizards, in my opinion, what GSP's attempting to do in fighting Khabib. There's no need for him to do it. I don't think it happens. And I think Khabib stays retired. I think Dana will do his best to convince him, but he doesn't strike me as the type of guy who's doing this for money. And let's not forget either, you got to look at challenges, right? Like I said, he's not going to 170. He doesn't want to fight McGregor or Poirier again. And what does that leave us with? Like a Charles Oliveira or Tony Ferguson? That's going to bring him out of retirement? Absolutely not. So I don't think Khabib Nurmagomedov comes back this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this year is the part that I'm kind of getting thrown about, because I think he'll come back at some point. I think he will fight again. Again, I said earlier, James, how often do MMA retirements last? Very, very few fighters actually stick. Chris Lytle, our guy, that's one of the few guys that's stuck with him, James. But actually, he came back and fought in bare knuckle too. So listen, these guys, they're competitors at heart, man. MMA fighters rarely retire and don't come back. In this case, I think we will see Khabib back, but does he come back this year? I'm not sure. So you know what? I'd like to go against the grain here, but all things considered, I think he's a man of his word too. I think he'll sit out this year, but at some point, James, I do think they'll be able to try to at least get that fight with GSP talking again, and if the money's big enough, because I think that's a huge fight, and I think a lot of people want to see it, but I don't know, man. Khabib, from what we've heard, he swore in his father's grave he wasn't going to fight again. He was going to retire, and he wanted to spend time with his family. I just think for Dana White, I can see why he wants to convince him as a promoter, but I think Khabib, he's a family man, James. He's a religious man, and I don't think this year. I don't think so. if he does, it's going to be at the end of the year, and it's only going to be for a super fight.
Yeah, and like I said, you got to look at the motivation here. And we talked about some of the other retirements that have happened in MMA of guys that have come back. Habib's not really like that. He's got his own stuff going on. He's got this new promotion now he's working with. I just don't think there's much incentive for Habib to come back unless it's a GSP fight. And even then, I think there's too many loopholes to get through and make this happen. And look, Dana White, he's tried his best to make stuff happen in the past that hasn't come to fruition. How long, Adam, was Dana White trying to get Fedor to fight in the UFC?
I was just about to say it.
Yeah. You know, like this is kind of what it reminds me of, is that I think just the hurdles are too big in this one for it to happen. Now, saying that, I've been surprised with a lot of matchmaking in the UFC and things that have come together. So I won't put it past the UFC, but I think this is one that's going to be a little bit too difficult for them to materialize, which is Khabib Nurmagomedov returning this year. So we'll move on from that. All right, kind of an interesting one for our 9th question, and they kind of tie together with the next couple ones. Who do you think is going to be the breakout star of 2021? I guess you could say last year it was Khamzat Chimaev. Who do you think will do it this year, in your opinion, Adam?
Yeah, no, I agree with Khamzat. That was my pick for last year. This year, I mean, listen, there's going to be someone that emerges, James, because I'll be honest with you, before Fight Island, I had never really known who Khamzat Chimaev was. Most of us didn't. Right? Like, I had seen some highlights on YouTube, James, and that's it. Now we know who he is. So it's guys can become stars like that, or girls. I'm going to pick someone who's on the roster already right now in the bantamweight division. I love that division, James. I think Casey Kenny's going to be a big star this year. And I'll tell you why. Because he's got an opportunity to fight Dominic Cruz, a former champion. And I like him in that fight, James. I'm not going to lie. I do like him in that fight. I think if he beats Dominic Cruz, you're talking about a guy that could possibly fast track towards a title shot. I realize he lost in Marab. That sucks, but James, how good did he look in the last couple of fights with Nathaniel Wood and Haile Alatang? Like, the striking's so good now. I know, James, you know what's crazy? I was actually looking him up the other day, and your interview with him back from like 2 years ago when LFA came up, which was pretty cool when I was doing my research. So I know you've been high on this kid for a long time. I think it's his time. I think he's 29 or 30 right now. Like, he's in his prime. He's ready to go. I think he beats Dominic Cruz and marches towards a title shot.
Now, we should clarify, when I say breakout star, I'm sort of referring just to fighting, because obviously Casey Kenny's not a guy that, you know, people are going to buy Casey Kenny shirts after this year or whatever. Like, I agree with you in terms of the assessment here. And that's the same thing with my pick here. I'm not picking a guy that I think is going to, you know, be this, you know, Conor McGregor type star. We're talking just in cage performance, something that gets people's attentions. And I like the pick with Kenny because I agree. I think that's a very winnable fight for him against Dominic Cruz. But I'm going with someone else who picked up a big win at the end of last year, but I think he's going to make gains on that going forward. No pun intended. And I'm talking about Cyril Gane here, the heavyweight. You know, I was really impressed with his win over Junior Dos Santos. It's all those, the very small minority who said it was a controversial stoppage. Go watch the fight again. It wasn't controversial, but this guy has looked great. He barely has any MMA experience, Adam, but the way he's winning these fights, you know, beating guys like Tanner Boser, like Junior Dos Santos. Is he a top 5 guy yet? I don't know. We're going to have to see that if he gets like a Rosenstruck or someone like that next, but I think the potential is there. And the other cool thing about this, if we ever get it, is I think down the line, we're going to see a Cyril Gane and Francis Ngannou fight, because there's some bad blood there, right? Francis Ngannou's ex-coach is Fernando Lopez, the same coach as Cyril Gane. I think that's a very interesting matchup that could take place down the line. But I think with heavyweight being as wide open as it is right now, with some of the names and some of the, you know, obviously like you've got guys like, you know, Curtis Blades and Ngannou sort of chomping at the bit, sort of in that title realm. But I think Gane's going to make, you know, some big moves this year. And I think he will get in that contenders, and I think he will surprise people. Because the thing for me, Adam, is that Cyril Gane is relatively young in terms of, especially in terms of heavyweight. I mean, the average age at heavyweight is like 35, it seems. Cyril Gane is 30. I mean, that's like him being like Chase Hooper's age, basically, in heavyweight. You know what I mean? Like that's basically how old that division is. So I think Gane is going to really make a splash this year, and I think we're going to be talking about him either, you know, in the title picture or close to being a contender by the end of 2021. What do you think of that?
Dude, I agree completely. I mean, I'm super high on this guy. Ever since he got that like knee bar submission or heel hook a few years ago. When did we see that in the heavyweight division? Yeah. So he's incredible. And he was a TKO champion back in 2019. Like, he's only been a pro for 2 years, which is crazy, right? Because he's so good. There was actually like a list of future odds out that I think Bet Online released last week. And Gon was like one of the top guys in the heavyweight division. So the odds makers know how good he is. I know how good he is. You do, James. The casual fan don't think does yet. But I think after that JDS knockout, I think people are starting to see how good this guy is. I've thought this for a while. I think he needs like one more big win against like a Curtis Blades or Derek Lewis before he gets that shot. But they might build him up a little bit slower, James. They might give him like someone else between JDS and like those top guys. I'm not sure who that be. But I can see him potentially being a guy who fights for the belt before the end of the year.
Absolutely. And then you got to add in too, if Jones comes up, and that could muddle things a little bit with the title picture, but we'll see. I think either way, Gane will definitely be a guy that people are talking about as being like a legit heavyweight fighter in this division. So that's just my wishful thinking there. All right. This is kind of tough to predict, but, and I kind of went outside the box a little bit for this one, but biggest disappointment, who do you think is going to be the biggest disappointment in 2021? I'd say, maybe for this past year, who's kind of disappointing?
I think Leon Edwards. I think that would be a good one too, James.
Leon Edwards, yeah, because he didn't fight. He didn't fight. In terms of actual like in cage performances, I mean, Kevin Lee's got to be up there just with losing to Oliveira the way he did, and then also being injured most of the year as well. That's got to be a disappointment. I mean, there's certainly a few ones for 2020, but I think the biggest disappointment this year, and I hate to go against a fellow Canadian here, Adam, but I don't think Rory McDonald's going to do that well in PFL. A lot of people are like, oh, he's going to take the $1 million. Did you watch his last two fights? The one against John Fitch, which I thought he lost, and then the fight where he just didn't look in it with Douglas Lima. I don't know what's happened to Rory over the last couple of years. Well, I do know what happened. He fought Robbie Lawler a couple of years ago, and he just hasn't really been the same since then in terms of some of the performances. I know the Paul Daly win was good in Bellator, and obviously he won the title coming over, but I don't know. Rory's head's not what it used to be. And if you talk to him, he's become very religious, and I'm not meaning to demean anyone who's religious by any means, but remember that quote he had in the John Fitch fight where he talked about how he didn't want to hurt anyone? I think
I was just about to say it, man. He didn't want to hurt him. Yeah.
If you're not mentally there, we've seen this. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Finish.
Well, I was going to say, if you're not there mentally, if you're not ready to, step in there and kill your opponent, I think that's a huge setback. And I just, yes, PFL does not have the strongest welterweight roster, but at the same time, if Rory's not anything close to what he used to be, he can be beat. And I think I do worry for him going forward because I just don't know what his motivation is. I actually had a Prospects video out recently, where I asked, this was from an interview I did with Rory a couple of years ago, where I asked, like, what would you be doing if you weren't an MMA fighter? And he said he'd be a priest. Like, he's kind of checked out a bit. So that's why I think he could be a big disappointment in PFL, especially for a guy that was considered one of the bigger signings for them.
No, I agree completely. Sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to get my point because I was going to say, I think his motivations just changed really, James. And actually, I was looking at, I think his Instagram or something recently, and it was just, it's all pictures of him and his wife and his kid, right? Like, it's not the Rory training at TriStar anymore. It's a different Rory. It's a different guy. He's in his 30s now, James. He's not in his 20s anymore. People forget he started fighting at age, I think, 16, right? Like, he's been fighting since he was a teenager, man, as a professional fighter. Him and Jordan Meehan. Jordan's in the same spot, James. I think both these guys, Canadian pioneers, guys that were kind of peers to us in many ways, same age as us, James. And now they're at the end of their careers. I think Rory's not going to do too well in PFL. I think there's a lot of guys in PFL that no one knows are really good and their 170-pound division that can give him problems. Actually, my pick's going to be in the 170-pound division too. And you know what? I think this is pretty common. Usually when a guy's coming from this, they can fall pretty quick. And I guess this point for me is going to be Khamzat Chimaev, James. I'm going to go pick Khamzat. I really like him. I think he's a great fighter. Don't get me wrong. I've loved his performances, but there's a few things that bother me. Number one, the COVID thing. I mean, he says he's got a bad case of it, James. He says his lungs have been severely affected by it. There was a study done recently, and it was a small sample, but I think it was a university in Ohio, and they had studied like 25 or 26 athletes, and they're all high-level like college athletes, and their hearts and their lungs were not as strong after they had COVID. So that could really screw with this guy. It's possible. And remember how many guys have got COVID this year? A lot of them lost their fights. So I think that. Plus, I'll be honest, James, I'm not convinced he beats Leon Edwards either. I think that's a really tough fight for him. So to me, it's like this guy that everyone's talking about is, the next Khabib, and he could be. He very well could be, James. Don't get me wrong. He could be. But I think there's enough red flags for me that I'm going to put him as a guy who could be a disappointment this year.
No, that's a great call. And I think it's really tough to replicate what he did last year. I mean, think how tough it's going to be. Like, if he wins a decision against Leon Edwards, people are going to be, not as impressed because this is a guy that, finished Gerald Meerschaert, finished all of his opponents. But there absolutely is a potential for him to be disappointing in 2021. We'll see. That's why I like this matchup, because you got a guy in Edwards who's got a disadvantage in that he hasn't fought since July of 2019. He hasn't really, fought anyone the style of Chimaev, so it makes it interesting. But at the same time, he's got way more experience than Khamzat Chimaev. It's funny, like if you go look at the comments on the prospects, like with the, because I posted a few already for that fight, which we know is going to get rescheduled. They just haven't picked a date yet. But like, people are convinced that like Leon's going to get finished in the first round.
I know.
What planet are you living on? Like, Leon's not a guy to go out there and get starched. And he's, yes, you could argue the competition isn't as strong, but I mean, he's fought guys like Vicente Luque of knockout power. He's fought a ground specialist in Gunnar Nelson where he's able to beat him. Like, this idea that Edwards is just going to get demolished, I just don't see it. Could it happen? Yeah, anything can happen in MMA. I didn't think he'd starch Gerald Meerschaert as quickly as he did in that fight, but Gerald was finished, the fight before that against Ian Heinisch. So I just think it's going to be this Leon Edwards fight. That's why, like, people are like, give Leon another fight. No, this is a good fight for both guys because it's going to determine where both fit. If Leon beats Chimaev, he's obviously a contender. If Chimaev wins, then obviously he's the real deal. But I agree with you that I think there is potential for Chimaev to be a big, disappointment because we just haven't seen him fight anyone good. And we've seen that where guys have had opponents that are, you know, maybe not up to par, and then they get that step up, like a Emin Shabazian fighting Derek Brunson, right? Where, you know, he faltered pretty badly.
I just want to see more from this guy. Like, was it that hard for the UFC to match him up fairly and move him up the ladder slow? Why did he have to fight the number 3 guard in his next fight? Just because he wanted it doesn't mean they had to give it to him, James. He didn't deserve that fight with he doesn't deserve it, quite frankly. I know he's a big name. That's why I got
you know
it.
what they're doing, though? They want to fast track this guy. They know he's the big ticket. It's no different than Masvidal fighting Usman. I mean, if you look at who Masvidal beat, other than Askren, I mean, really, some of those wins, you know, really aren't, you know, that like a Nate Diaz win gets you a title shot against, you know, Kamaru Usman. Like, that doesn't really make sense, but it's because of the hype, right? Because of the fact that this guy was the big ticket that they wanted to put that together. So that's sort of my thoughts. So you went with Chimaev, I went with Rory McDonald. Okay, last question for predictions of the year, and then we'll answer some questions here if you guys have any in the chat. So put them in the chat box if you want to here. Who will be the fighter of the year in 2021? I'm curious on this one, Adam. Who are you picking?
I got to go with my guy, John Jones. I'm going to pick John Jones, James. I think he moves up to heavyweight, and I think he wins the belt. I think he's going to be fighter of the year, man. I think he cements his legacy this year as the GOAT. I think he's good. I don't know if he's going to fight Stipe or Francis. We didn't even talk about that fight today, but that fight's going to happen at some point, and I have no idea who wins that rematch, but I think Jones does get the winner. I wish he got like a tune-up fight, James, against like an Overeem or something, or a Derek Lewis, someone like that, but it looks like Dana White's just going to give him a title shot against the winner of that fight, and I truly believe he can prove once again he's the best fighter in the world. I thought that for the last 10 years. I still think that, and I think he's going to be fighter of the year once again. I think he's got a lot to prove. I think he's motivated. I can't wait to see John Jones a heavyweight, man. We've been calling for this forever, James. I can't wait to see it finally happen.
Great pick. That's definitely someone I considered, but I'm going with Israel Adesanya. I'm riding this train even farther, Adam. I think Adesanya goes to 205. He wins the belt. He comes back down to middleweight, fights either Whitaker or someone like that, and ends up beating them as well. And I think that's going to be enough for him to be fighter of the year because, I mean, look, if Adesanya wins 2 belts, I mean, that's GOAT status right there. I mean, look how much people are talking about Cejudo being the GOAT, and how many title defenses did he have? I mean, barely any, but people are already talking about that with a guy who's only had a couple title defenses, whereas, you know, Adesanya, like, he's still got plenty of fight left. He's not retiring anytime soon. So I could see people pushing that over the edge and saying, look, this guy won 2 belts. This guy's got to be considered for fight of the year. So I think Adesanya can do it. Now, obviously, the big question is, can he beat Jan Blachowicz? We already discussed earlier how difficult that may be. So he might not. We might not even get there past the Blachowicz fight. But I think if he does beat Blachowicz, which I think is possible, and then he goes back down to middleweight, I think I don't see anyone beating him at middleweight right now, and that includes Robert Whitaker. Even with the adjustments he made, I think Adesanya wins that fight. So that's going to be my pick. And I think we got to point out as well, Adam, that typically when it comes to fighter of the year, the UFC usually does go with sort of a bigger name than, say, like, you know, like a Kevin Holland, for example, like, you know, for last year, even though, you know, you could definitely make a strong argument for Holland with winning 5 fights last year that he deserves it. Sometimes they tend to go with the bigger names. So we'll see. But I think Adesanya is a pretty solid choice. And I don't think him and Jones will fight next year. I don't think that'll happen, even at heavyweight or whatever weight class.
Let me say one more thing. I think it's time for the UFC to have its own like award show. I'm tired of this fighters only thing. I think it's good. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's time. It's 2020, James. Like, they're trying to say they're a big time sport, like the NFL, MLB, NHL. Like, these leagues have award ceremonies, James. Like, they have Hall of Fames that they are actually voted on and mean something. I think it's time for the UFC to really make that step forward. Have an award show where the fighters go on the stage, that they get some, like, you know, trophy. I think that'd be cool, man.
Well, it's true. Like every other sports league does it, right? Like NHL has their awards, NFL has theirs, and it's done by the organization, like by the company. It's not done by like a third party, which is what essentially the fighters only awards are. And by the way, like, I don't know if I think they fixed it this year, but it was always like the awards were for like were in the summer, and they were for like the year before. Like, that was just such a dumb idea. Like, no one remembers like stuff that happened in 2019 for awards like for 2020. It just didn't make any sense. So they've got
this year that. It was from January 2019 to July 2020, James. So it was even more confusing for people.
Exactly.
Because everyone's like, where's Holland? But he didn't count. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but I agree. Like, they got to change the format. And can we get rid of the leading man award? Come on. Like, Dana wins it every year. Like, this is ridiculous.
He's literally won it every year. He's literally won every year. The UFC's literally won best promotion every year. And Ariel has won best journalist every year except for the first year where John Morgan won it. Ariel's won it, I think.
No, there's another year Ariel didn't win it, actually. People forget this. Do you know this? I think it was 2011. There was another journalist who won. Do you know who it is? He's not even covering the sport anymore, Adam. Do you remember this?
Mike Chiappetta?
No.
Oh, I'm not sure. Who is it?
Aaron True.
Oh, really?
Remember the guy who got choked up by Cyborg?
Yeah, I do. Yep, I do.
Yeah, if you go back, I think it was 2011. He won Journalist of the Year over Ariel, and mind you, he was basically the Ariel back then. Like, he was going to every event and doing different things, and he was everywhere. Like, he had a huge YouTube channel, and doing a lot of different stuff. So yeah, at least with the journalism, I mean, even then, I mean, you and I have talked behind the scenes about how some of the journalists are picked like certain names. It's a little bit weird. Not that I deserve it or anything, but I was just saying in general, some of the selections, it's like, what did they really do in 2020? So I don't know, but there you go. That's sort of how we figure it there. So our fighter of the year, like I said, Adesanya for me, he's picking John Jones. We'll have to revisit the show at the end of the year, Adam.
Yeah, it'd be fun to revisit
see how he did there as well. Let's answer a couple questions as we're wrapping things up. We're getting to the top of the hour here.
Sure.
Cole Shelton, our good buddy and your coworker over at BJ Penn, says Conor McGregor beats Poirier, beats Gaethje to win the vacant belt in the summer. Boxes against Pacquiao November, December. Interesting. I don't know if he beats Gaethje, Adam. We'll see. Gaethje's pretty good, right?
I mean, interesting fight. We talked about that fight a couple of years ago, James. Like, I love Gaethje. I think those leg kicks would cause Conor problems. That'd be a fun fight. Yeah, I don't know. This boxing match, though, once you mention it, I've had it in the back of my mind. It just makes so much sense, right? Like, there's so much money there, James.
Absolutely. By the way, this is the first time I'm watching the stream because I have to check out the questions. My lighting looks so much better than it did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it looks fantastic, man.
Over the holidays, you should see it. It's the size of like a rocket ship, so it's a little bit nuts for that as well. Hey, producer Jordan actually has a question that he's going to chime in here and ask us. We'll get to that now, but we do have some more questions in the chat. But Jordan, go ahead.
Hey guys, James. Yeah, you do look great. I wonder how I got that. I'm just kidding. So I have a question, Adam, mostly for you. Does the UFC actually want to be like other major sports organizations? I think a lot of the propaganda that we've been seeing might say otherwise. And then on top of that, just going back to the early days of the pandemic, Dana White was continually talking about, I didn't ask anybody to take any pay cuts. I didn't need to renegotiate. So I kind of would argue that, I don't know if it's a Dana decision or higher ups decision, but I would argue that they're kind of angling more towards WWE than they are the inverse in the professional sports league. That's just my take, though.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I think the fact they're on ESPN now does help their credibility a lot, especially compared to where they once came from with Spike TV, and even before that, not even being on TV, the old dark ages they used to call it. But I don't know, man. I still think Dana, he brags about that too much in interviews for me not to think that's a consideration. Like, he's always said, we want to be in the same level as NFL and all these big sports. So I do think that deep down he wants that. But he makes some great points, like the UFC compared to the other league, it's not as professionally run. Let's be completely honest, James. Like, there's, if you go to the other sports leagues, like if a guy says something or does something outside the cage, there's provisions there to be suspended for a certain amount of games. The UFC, it's whatever Dana wants to do. Like, look at Mike Perry. He's cutting himself on Instagram, man, and he's not getting suspended. So, Jordan, I think you got some good points, man. I still think that Dana White truly believes the UFC can be on that level of the NFL one day. But for me, and as much as I love UFC, I love MMA. Don't get me wrong, James. It's my life. Jordan, it's my life. But it's a niche sport. It's a violent sport. Not everyone's going to like it. That's just a fact.
Yeah, I think that'll always be the case. I don't think it'll ever be truly mainstream. Like, I'll never forget when I worked at a company a couple of years ago outside of MMA, and I remember there was UFC on the screen, and the executive that, or sort of one of the heads up there, would be like, "Oh, I don't know how people watch that. It's too brutal." And it's like, yeah, but you watch football. Like, how's it any different? But anyways, I think there's always going to be those people who think it's too violent. Anyways, let's get to our next question here. We'll lead Reed. I hope that's how I'm saying it. I know you've been on my chat as well. He says, let's say Izzy beats Jan. What division does he vacate, middleweight or lightweight? I don't see the UFC booking Izzy versus Glover. They would want a guy with some hype like Till or Holland. That is interesting. Like, I don't know if Izzy would vacate one. Maybe he would try. I don't know. I honestly can't answer that. I don't know what would happen. I think there's a chance that he maybe takes another like heavyweight fight as middleweight sort of sorts itself out. Although Whitaker's ready to go. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. What do you think? What do you think with Izzy if he wins the title? What happens? Does he vacate?
There's so many options, right? Like, I think he'll have to vacate one of them. I felt bad for Glover, by the way. He kind of got screwed there. I thought he should have got the shot first. What about this, though? What about he keeps both the belts, moves up to heavyweight and fights John Jones at some point and goes for a triple belt? Would the UFC let him run 3 divisions at once? Become that first guy to ever do that?
On there, right? If they wanted to.
Sure, why not? Yeah, I think, you know what, James? Interim belt seemed like the answer for this. The UFC's all in on Israel Adesanya. They're not going to take his belt away at any point soon. We'll see what happens in the Jan fight. If he wins that fight, he'll be a double champ. They'll market him. He'll get that shot, James, on top of the Octagon, like DC, like Conor, Amanda Nunes, where they got both the belts. You'll get that picture forever, right? So they'll run with that. They'll promote that. But James, honestly, thinking about 3 division champ sounds even better, doesn't it?
Certainly does. Let's continue on with the questions. Marcus Williams, our good friend Marcus, Adam, back in the
love
chat.
That guy. Great guy.
Marcus, got a chance to meet him in Vegas. It wasn't last year, it was the year before. I didn't go anywhere last year. What am I talking about? It was 2019. It was when I was in Vegas and I saw him. He says, 2021 question for James and Adam. Will Henry Cejudo have a UFC fight in 2021? I am saying no. I don't think the money's there for him. I think Cejudo thinks he's a bigger draw than he really is, and I don't think the UFC is going to pay him that money. What do you think?
Yeah, now he's talking about boxing Ryan Garcia, who's a big boxing star. So, I mean, he wants to pursue that, but I think he'll fight again. I do think we'll see him fight again. Actually, you talk about someone who could become a 3-division champ. I think he'll come back. I think he's going to fight Volkanovski at some point. I don't know if it's going to be this year or next year, James. I do think he'll get that shot to win that third belt, 145. Too much heat there, man. These guys don't like each other. They're talking smack. Volkanovski's going to fight Ortega next. After that, probably Zabit, I guess, or Calvin Kattar Holloway, the winner of that. But that division is still kind of up in the air, and I could definitely see him getting a title shot as well there if he comes back in Henry Cejudo.
Straight Wagger says, not disagreeing that Stipe may retire this year, just curious to why he would sign with Vayner Sports. Can they help him in post-career retirement, for example, or would ties be cut on retirement? Well, I know Stipe actually launched a podcast. Did you see this, Adam? And I think that
I heard about this. Yeah.
Vayner. I'm sure part of Stipe knows that part of him knows that, like, he is a brand. He is the heavy. I mean, you could argue that he is the best heavyweight of all time. I think they're going to use that brand post retirement and help him out. But I think he also likes being a firefighter. Like, I don't think he needs to fight. And I think, the longer he stays around, the more likely it is he loses the title. So I do wonder if, I think him being with Vayner probably would lead more to him wanting to retire, because I think there's a lot of options at his disposal, the way that Vayner's sort of worked with other athletes post retirement. We'll see. I don't know. What's your sense on that?
I thought it's a really good question, actually. I didn't even consider that because I think it was pretty recent he signed with them. We'll see. I mean, honestly, I'm not convinced he retires, but he could, because that fight with Frank James, he might get brutally knocked out in that fight. It might not just be like, why do I want to fight anymore? To be honest, it doesn't seem like he's really that interested in that fight that much, James, right? Like the Francis rematch dominated him. I think he really wants the John Jones fight, if anything, but at this point, the UFC probably wants to get him back in the cage. That's the biggest problem with Stipe, James. He fights once a year now. I love the guy, great fight. We interviewed him years ago when he wasn't a champ when we talked to him, James.
Yeah.
But he doesn't fight that frequently. So, if anything, it might be a good thing for the division for him to move on. And someone like Francis who wants to be active, maybe that's better for the heavyweight division.
Continuing on, Marcus has another question we'll get to. We'll just answer a couple more questions here.
Yeah, sure.
If Kevin Holland beats Brunson, I would love to see Holland versus Israel as tough coaches. I think Cody versus O'Malley and Till versus Perry as tough coaches would do good ratings. I don't think Mike Perry gets anywhere close to being a tough coach. I think with everything he's going through now, we scratch him off the list. Darren Till would be entertaining. Cody O'Malley would be interesting, but I don't know if they do that fight. O'Malley just lost his last fight. I don't think they want to risk him fighting a Garbrandt at this point, so I would scratch him out as well. Plus, O'Malley's pretty young. I don't know if they'd want him as a coach. Israel and Holland would be awesome. I'd be down for that.
I'd love to see that. Actually, after Holland won the fight with Ontiveros, when he hurt his shoulder or whatever, as someone was in the audience, he went right to the cage and was talking smack to him. And I love that. Another guy I like that talks smack is Sean Strickland. He won't be on the show, but I love that guy. I just like these guys. I like guys that are talkative in the cage, James, like the Diaz brothers. It's, as a fan, it's fun to watch, and it screws the guys when they're fighting, right? So I think those are really good options, James. But we'll see. I mean, it's just tough, man. This whole thing with restrictions, COVID, the vaccine and stuff, I think it's going to really make finding tough coaches hard. I think guys don't really want to do it right now too, James?
West Coast pointing out in the chat that it was Khabib who swore on his who promised his mom, not his father, but whatever. You get the point. Is that
he also did that? Charles Oliveira, just to clear that up, Charles Oliveira, if you Google this, he said he had some insider information that a family friend told him that Khabib also went to his father's grave and swore on it that that'd be it or something. Yeah. So Charles Oliveira is the one who said, just to clear that up.
Yeah, no worries. Either way, it's the same point pretty much, is that he has a family member that he promised to. I don't think it matters. Straight Wagger says that Rakic right now is plus 650 to be champ by the end of 2021 is worth a look. He can beat Reyes or Glover, in my opinion. And who knows if Israel wins, defends in that division. A win could be a title fight looking at plus 650. I don't see it happening. Look, my thing with Rakic, and I talked about this on my chat this morning, I mean, I think he had an opportunity to finish Anthony Smith and he didn't. And that to me says he's not ready to be a contender yet. It was a good win over Smith. I thought it looked great, but I don't even think he gets past Thiago Santos. That's who he's fighting next. Don't count out Santos over one fight, man. I think Santos can absolutely win that. And right now, Adam, I don't know if you saw the odds, but Rakic is like a 2-1 favorite. I don't know about that, man. We're talking about Thiago Santos here, the guy who has a knockout win over the champ. I don't know. I look, if you're a believer in Rakic, go for it, but I wouldn't place that. I don't think Rakic becomes champ this year. Absolutely not.
As a long shot at plus 650, I don't think it's a bad bet. So I think Straight Wager's right that it's worth a shot maybe. But for me, I'm with you 100%, James. That Anthony Smith fight, he disappointed. James, how did he not finish that fight? Are you serious? Yeah. Anthony Smith, he couldn't even walk. He couldn't stand up, James. I know the kicks hurt him in the first round, but after that, he just kind of held on. And Rakic, to me, didn't show that killer instinct that I want to see from a guy. And that's why he didn't get the next shot at the belt. They're like, well, go fight Santos first and see if you can beat him. Santos is like a gatekeeper now. Honestly, I'm not even convinced he would beat Glover. I think Glover could get him down to the ground and beat him. Volkan Oezdemir beat this guy too, right? Like, he's a good fighter. He's really good, but I'm not convinced he's going to be the champ by the end of this year.
We need to see more. I agree with you. That's why the Santos fight is a good test. Okay, we're going to answer the last 3 questions here. Marcus once again says, what are your thoughts on Cater versus Holloway being on ABC? I think it's awesome. Again, though, like Adam and I pointed out, I think that there's going to be people who are still turned off by MMA for whatever reason. I mean, we've had the sport around for as long as we have, and there's still people who think it's too brutal, but it's a step in the right direction. I think anytime you're getting mainstream eyeballs on a fight, I think is good. And I think this is a great fight to have because I think Holloway and Cater has the potential to be a fight of the year candidate. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I love the fight. The ABC thing's cool. I mean, it doesn't really impact us as Canadians, James. That's more for American audience, right? That's the other thing. Yeah. But I think it's a great fight. And the only thing I'll say is I noticed that it's starting at 12 noon Eastern time. But the football games, that's when the prelim starts. So it's going to be on for six hours. But there's the NFL wildcard round. So it's going to I don't know how it's going to impact the ratings. That's what kind of bothers me a little bit. Like, people might say, oh, this is a failure if the ratings are bad, even though it's going to compete against, like, I think 3 football games. So it's kind of a tough spot for the UFC, but I think it's a good thing overall.
Gerald chimes in and says, Johnny Walker versus Jimmy Crute. What are your thoughts? I'm a little surprised by this because 205 doesn't have a ton of prospects. And now they're kind of putting 2 prospects together, albeit 2 prospects who have had some setbacks. I mean, Crute lost to Misha Serkinov, and Walker obviously had his loss to Corey Anderson and Krylov as well. I think it's just a case of them trying to figure out who the better prospect is and who they want to push. I am a little surprised, though, because Walker really gained a lot of hype a couple of years ago to the point of where you remember people saying he was going to beat John Jones. I mean, this is how far we've been removed from Johnny Walker and where he's been. But yeah, I mean, it's no different than them like doing like a Jillian Robertson and Macy Barber a couple of years ago where they're trying to like see who the better prospect is. I mean, I like the style matchup. I do wonder, though, if maybe they're kind of biting their head off a little bit as far as figuring out who the better guy is. But what do you think of the fight?
I really like the fight. You remember when I went to Brazil a couple of years ago and Johnny Walker, we had dinner with him and he was like the Poker Stars guy?
Yep.
Dude, that's when he had the 3 straight wins. He had knocked out Serkinov, Ledet, and Khalil Roundtree. And I was all in on this guy, especially after hanging out and having dinner with him. Like, this guy's going to be a champ. So I was one of those people, James. I'm not going to lie. But then he goes and loses back-to-back fights, right? And then Crute had that loss to Tanisha. He's looked great lately. Crute's really young. I think he's 24, if I'm not mistaken. Johnny, I think, is 29. So 2 young guys still, James. A little surprised they would match them up, but I do like the fight because I think stylistically it's a striker versus a grappler, really, in my opinion. Crute's going to try to take him down. Johnny's going to try to keep it up on the feet. I'll just say this. I wouldn't be surprised if Johnny Walker gets upset again, though, James. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, Jimmy Crute's really good. That is a tough matchup for Walker, and kudos for him for taking it. I think the Anthony Smith and Crute fight would have made more sense, veteran versus prospect, but we'll see how that fight unfolds with him and Johnny Walker. Okay, our last question from Elmar Umarov. He says, do you think Charles Oliveira and Jose Aldo could have been bigger stars if they knew English? They've been in the UFC for 10 years, but they can't learn English. 100%. I mean, you look at like, there's so many fighters. You look like you think of Joanna Jędrzejczyk. If she couldn't speak English, if she would have been anywhere close to the star she is now. I mean, it really does help. And Aldo's the big one. It's like, you've been here forever. Like, you know, not that anyone should have to be forced to do anything, but you just think of the star potential that Aldo could have had if he spoke a little bit of English, could talk a little bit of trash. Like the McGregor thing was so good for McGregor because Aldo couldn't really counter. What was he going to say? He can't even speak English. So yeah, I agree on that front. I think if anyone's in the UFC, you got to work on your promotion as much as you can, whether that's, you know, learning the English language if you don't speak it, or, you know, getting cool t-shirts made or something just to get people's attention. That's what really wins fans over, and you're a brand essentially. So the more you can utilize your brand, the better. But I'm sure you agree with me here, Adam.
Yeah, I do. You've been saying this for almost 10 years, James. So ever since I know you, like you've been saying that about Aldo. You said that years ago, James. He was like, you know, just new to the UFC. But I remember especially when he had that press conference in Toronto, right, with Conor McGregor. And I remember after that, James, you had some comments about that back in the parting shot about him not speaking English, not taking it. Remember that? You remember the press conference very well. And yeah, I think the same with Charles. Charles seems like on Twitter, at least, he's writing a little bit, but doesn't seem comfortable enough yet. By the way, Charles Oliveira, James, he's been in the UFC for 10 years too. I would have never expected him to become the fighter he's become. It just shows like this sport, man. I love this sport so much, man. Like these guys that when we were kind of getting into it, like they were just kind of prospects and they floundered. Now they're contenders 10 years. It's amazing, James. And I've known James almost for 10 years now, man. Like looking back, it's been a long time, man. And
crazy.
You know, love the sport for a long time too.
It's a good time to wrap things up. Yeah. Thanks so much for the questions, everyone. If you're watching the replay of this, just post a question in the chat or in the comments, I should say, and we'll get back to it as soon as I can. Also, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. We're trying to get to 10,000 followers, subscribers here on the Live Movement channel as soon as possible. So I really appreciate it. Adam, what do you got coming up this week? We're all getting back into the groove for 2021. So what do you got on tap, and where can people find you on social media, man?
Yeah, man. First, I just wanted to say thanks for letting me join you and Jordan today. It was a great show, and thanks for everyone who asked a question and joined the live audience. You guys can follow me on Twitter at MMAdamMartin. My podcast is called the MMA OB Daily Podcast. They do it at 10 a.m. on Tuesday and Thursday, so I'll be doing it tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you want to join us at MMAOddsBreaker.com, you can also find me at BJPen.com, MMARings.net, and Odds.com. James, Jordan, thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me on. We'll definitely get you back on here soon. I know everyone loves seeing us paired together. Maybe, who knows, maybe 2021 will be the year we'll finally reunite and do something together. We'll figure some things out. We'll check it out. But like I said, guys, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Lynch on Sports. Like I said, all my best interviews are here on the Line Movement channel. So make sure you subscribe. I want to thank you all so much for watching. We'll be back here. I'll be back here a week today, doing another kind of, we'll see what we're going to talk about next Monday, probably some news, but there's lots to get into. Just like I said, thanks so much for the support. I hope all of you had a great holiday season. We'll be back here next Monday. And thanks so much for watching. I'm James Lynch, signing off.